I'm Gregory Zobel. I teach educational technology at Western Oregon University. I have a background in technical communication, and one of the major players in technical communication is Clay Spinuzzi. Clay agreed to be interviewed, and Liz Poland from Intercom kindly decided to sponsor. In case you don't know, Intercom is a practitioner magazine for STC, the Society for Technical Communicators. So we're doing this live, but also we're recording it so that if you missed the broadcast, you can at least see it later on. So in case you're not familiar with Clay's work, he is a prolific researcher and publisher with oodles of articles, and he's got 2 books out on 2 significant scholarly presses, MIT and Cambridge. Recently, in January, he published Topsight, which it's only been out for 2 months. It's just around 300 pages long, very easy to read, very readable, practitioner, layperson oriented in many ways. And so he agreed to an interview. I think I've said that 3 times now. But Clay is, in addition to being a prolific author and researcher, he is a professor of rhetoric at UT Austin. So the stream has 2 parts today. The first part will focus on understanding Clay's approach to complex information environments. And then the second part, Clay will field some of your questions, and you can input those questions into Ustream, and it's up again if you go to the middle to right part of your screen. You can see the chat button, you can click on that, and then you can type in the questions. Hopefully we'll get a lot of questions so we can get a rich dialogue going. Then after about 10-20 minutes of each part, then we'll bring the interview to a close. I did want to add that in several months there will be a book review appearing of Topsight in technical communication, as well as another interview which will focus on training new technical communicators and knowledge workers on how to use these research methods which Clay has discussed in Topsight, basically bringing more research at an earlier level in the field, and also for knowledge workers who haven't done much research but want to get started immediately in their organization, what they can do to implement. And that will be coming out in Intercom in several months. We still have to work out the exact deadline, but just wanted you to know what's happening today and then the several future steps. So ready for the interview?
Let's do it.
Okay. First, thank you for agreeing to the interview. Appreciate you taking the time. I know the conferences can be pretty crazy. So Topsight seems to be a significant addition to your prior work in publishing in the academic journals. It's definitely a different step away from the academic presses, or addition to the academic presses. But what I really enjoyed is that it's readable, and I think it makes technical communication more approachable from a lay audience, or for a lay audience. It appears as if you're shifting publishing environments, and I just wanted to state that as we get moving, because self-publishing in the digital revolution is huge right now.
Yeah.
But that is not part of our immediate conversation, but hopefully someone will either ask about that, or that's another conversation which another interviewer or another discussant can bring up. But I wanted to address that right off the top. But let's go ahead and focus on your work and how Topsight can help knowledge workers, researchers, and communicators improve their understanding and performance in complex information environments. How do you describe your work, your field research, to non-academics or other knowledge workers?
Okay, well, what I tell people is that I like to go into organizations and just kind of get just map out how information flows in the environment, what sorts of information they have, how they pass from one person to another, where it gets stuck, and how to unblock it. And I think that's huge. So to do that, I go into organizations. I follow people around in a non-creepy way. I get their permission first. I follow them around, see what they do. I interview them about it afterwards, because they always have a perspective that I can't access just by watching them. I pick up the texts and look at the environments in which they do their work, And I use that to build up a large overall picture of how they're flowing information around. That's my job in a nutshell.
Okay, great. Could you describe one or two different complex informations in which you've worked or researched, just so that...
Sure. Well, let's take my second book, Network. I went into a telecommunications company, mid-sized, it's about 300 people, and I shadowed and interviewed about a third of the people in each department. And I did that over, I think, a period of 10 months, just to get an idea of what they were talking about, how they were moving that information around. And I was able to identify certain places where the information just wasn't moving. My first book, I did something similar, but this was people using crash data in the state of Iowa. So I drove my 86 Ford Ranger all over the state of Iowa, visiting people, seeing how they use the database, seeing where they had problems and where those problems clustered.
What unsuccessful strategies have you seen knowledge workers and researchers use to understand those kinds of environments? In other words, if someone wants to understand a complex information environment, what should she not do?
Okay.
What should he not do?
Right. Well, the classic problem that we have is that people see a symptom and they mistake it for the problem. And, the classic example is, let's say a manager keeps telling people, you got to turn your timesheets in on time. And they don't do it, and they don't do it, and they don't do it. And then finally the manager bangs his or her fist on the table and says, okay, there's a new rule. And the new rule, the punitive rule, works, but it breaks several other things down the line. And that's because, if people aren't turning their timesheets in, perhaps there's some sort of systemic reason. They can't get the information in order to put the timesheet together, or they have conflicting obligations, and not understanding that whole system means that you're basically moving the bubble around under the rug rather than fixing the problem. That's the sort of thing that we see in industry, but we also see that in research. We sometimes come to a research project in a too tunnel visioned way. So we focus on one very specific thing, but we don't pull out to see, why are people, let's say, using this Post-it note instead of using the database? Why are people turning their timesheets in late? And if we can't kind of pull back, look at all the symptoms and see what kind of underlying disorder is causing them, then we're just kind of moving the problem around.
And now that we have an idea of what not to do,
Yeah.
What do you think is the best approach towards understanding and thriving in a complex environment? I mean, I think it's first we want to survive,
Mm-hmm.
but moving past survival into actual success and thriving so that the organism or the organization can grow as a whole.
Well, I think you have several different pieces here. One is that you have to realize that it really is a complex organism, complex organization. And that means that not everybody is going to have an understanding of what's going on. They're going to see little pieces, little problems. And so being able to kind of pull back and see that whole system is critical. A second part is making sure that you've got enough flexibility with your structure. Often we see problems and we think structure is the way to handle it. Here's a new rule, here's a new system that everybody has to follow, and then all the problems go away. Really what that does, if taken too far, is it introduces a lot of brittleness into the system. We have to reintroduce flexibility. And when you see people coming up with kind of off-the-wall innovations, and that could be anything from using Post-it notes to do something really critical, to routing around an information system they're supposed to use. When you see that kind of stuff happening, often it's because they're trying to resolve this conflict and put flexibility back in the system. It's really critical to be able to kind of map those out, to figure out where they're happening, and to figure out how to continue to let play happen in the system. And that might mean taking a survey of how people are doing things. It might mean observing them. It might mean underdefining certain points in the process so that they can determine their own ways of getting things done.
Have you seen a lot of flexibility in organizations? Is it that's naturally occurring, or is flexibility something that people have to actively strive to bring in the organization?
Flexibility is something that people will, no matter what, pull into the organization if they have any sort of latitude, and that's simply because when we're dealing with situations day to day, we come up with different problems that we haven't had to handle before in this environment, and to deal with that, we often just cobble together a solution, or we grab a solution that worked at the last place we worked. And so we end up importing a lot of different solutions to these problems. The problem with that, of course, is that these solutions are not necessarily compatible with each other. They're not necessarily compatible with the rest of the work environment, and so you start getting these little breakdowns as well. So sometimes you get hyper flexibility, especially when there's not much of a controlling authority. There's not much in the way of telling people how to do things, and that gives a little bit too much play, and so it's harder to move information around an environment like that. So I think most organizations, they kind of strive to hit a balance between those two.